So we've been looking at crime in America for the past couple of lessons. Last week we began by defining what crime is. It's what one does or does not do, in which there's some form of penalty. And we talked about legislatures are responsible for making and determining what laws constitute crime and what laws constitute the punishment for crimes, but they get their ideas from the people. And then we looked at some causes of crime. We talked about gangs and guns, and we talked about substance abuse. Today, we are going to look at a group that often gets overlooked because we are more, in a lot of cases, we're more concerned about dealing with the perpetrators of the crime, okay, that we often overlook the victims. So we're going to take a couple minutes today and we're going to talk about the victims of crime. Again, we are talking in broad strokes, okay, big picture things. Just as the nature of crime differs and what people want to see in terms of punishment for crime is going to differ, our responses to victims are going to differ. Okay. As we go through these notes, please be sure you are jotting things down. I will try to give you a heads up as to what I want you to copy down specifically, but be sure you're copying your own notes down as we go through these. All right. Now, there's nothing really to copy down on this first slide. But just as the nature, as I was saying, just as the nature of crime, crime wears many faces, and you can find crime in all aspects of society, cities, towns, village, you can find crimes everywhere. Victims also are found in all segments of society. Okay. Teens and young adults are more likely to be victims of crime than any other age group. Although I will say a lot of times when we're talking about victims, we're talking about people that can be easily taken advantage of. And that is going to apply to a bunch of different people. Teens and young adults seem to be the majority of victims. And we kind of attribute this to the fact that they are young and maybe inexperienced and they have no idea that they are being taken advantage of. Okay. Gender, socioeconomic status, race, and location are also factors influencing victims, right? Males are more frequently the victims of violent crime, except for rape and sexual assault. And that's one of the things as we go through this lesson, one of the things as we progress throughout the rest of the semester is our ideas of victims have changed, okay? It used to be only certain genders were considered victims of certain crimes, but rape is a good example, okay? The majority of victims are female, okay? But that does not mean that male victims, there can't be male victims of rape either, okay? And in fact, our evolution of the legal system, our evolution of crime has taken that into account, okay? That crime wears many faces, victims wear many faces, okay? Um, Gender, socioeconomic status, race, and location can influence victim. Anytime anybody's going to be taken advantage of, okay, they become a victim, all right? Lower income households are more likely to be victims. Again, why? Because they are going to be taken advantage of. Members of minority groups, urban dwellers, and those who rent their homes are more likely to be victims as well. Why? Because they are seen as easy targets to be taken advantage of. Okay. Now, I want you to get down. Well, before we get there are victim assistance programs out there to provide counseling, medical care, and other services. All right. There are also victim compensation laws. And this represents an evolution as well. Okay. Just as we are broadening our ideas about who can be a victim, how we should help victims is also changing and growing. All right. At one point in time, sadly, a lot of times victims were kind of left out on their own. All right. But now we have victim assistance programs. There are victim compensation laws, okay, to provide financial help for victims. Not only getting back money, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but simple things like paying medical bills, helping to make up for lost salary, paying funeral costs and death benefits to victims' families. All right. Victim impact statements are important now. They show the effect of the defendant's crime on the victim's physical and psychological well-being over time. Victims can testify in court a lot of times, and there are going to be certain crimes, again, as we move through this semester. Victims weren't asked to testify, okay? Sometimes if the victims were asked to testify, they were even questioned more harshly than the supposed defendant, okay, the supposed perpetrator. They themselves were put on trial. So the fact that we allow victims to testify is a big deal, but also how we treat them has evolved. Okay. Now, what I want you to get down is this term right here, restitution. Restitution requires criminals to pay back or otherwise compensate the victims. It is the act of restoring something to the owner, making good for loss or damage, etc. Okay. This is going to be a big component of what we do now for victims is the perpetrator has to pay restitution. All right. It goes back there. It could even be paying for the funeral or death benefits to the victim's family if the victim passes away. Okay. There are victim advocacy groups that help victims with their trauma and protect the rights of the victims. They also deal with specific crimes like rape, spousal abuse, drunk driving, and child abuse. Okay. And one of the groups these that deal with specific crimes are MAD, Mothers Against Drug Driving. Okay. So again, how we respond to victims and how we treat victims has evolved over time. And we'll get into more detail when we get into more specific crimes and things like that. We'll talk a little bit about this more in detail. All right. So be sure you got restitution down on the screen. Now, I want you to get down the things on the next screen as well. Because we're talking about preventing and reporting crime. If you become a victim, all right, you need to know how to prevent crime and what to do if you are a victim. All right. Number one, there's things that you can do to prevent being a victim in the first place, like report suspicious activity to the police. All right. Neighborhood watches are a good example of this. All right. If you see somebody in your neighborhood that's not supposed to be there, call the police. Okay. It's better to have them come and question the person than to have that person be up to no good and cause crimes. Okay. Do simple things like always lock your doors and windows. Okay. Be alert of your surroundings. All right. Morgan Harrington, the young lady that was at a concert at UVA who disappeared, and sadly, her remains were found months later. This is one of the big things. These number 3 and number 4 are two of the big things that came out after her disappearance. Be alert of your surroundings and use the buddy system, okay, in dangerous situations. Sadly, she did not use the buddy system. She was not alert, and somebody took advantage of her and ultimately cost her her life. So be alert, use the buddy system. Simple things like do not flash money in public. All right. That can get people to take advantage of you in several ways. Okay. Whether approaching you and making up some sort of false charity they want you to donate to, or stealing the money anyway. I mean, simple things like lock your doors and windows, don't flash money in public. Do things like that, and that will help prevent crime and help you from becoming a victim. Now, if you are the victim of crime, stay calm and call the police. Okay, and this is going to be very, very hard to do. Okay, this is going to be very hard to do, but stay calm and call the police. Try to give the police as much information as possible and as many details as possible. Okay. If you are the victim of a crime and if you go through and you call the police, which you should, you got to realize that you might be asked to file an official complaint or testify in court. Do not let that frighten you. All right. And again, these last 3, 6, 7, and 8 are difficult because if you're a victim, it's very, very emotional. You're experiencing sadness, you're experiencing anger and stuff like that. You got to process all this stuff, but try to stay calm and call the police, give them as many details as possible, and follow through. Okay. because ultimately we want to see justice done. All right. So be sure you get some of these tips down and some of these suggestions down. You're going to see this again on the quiz for this unit. Okay. So just get some of these down about what you need to know if you are a victim and what you need to know to prevent a crime. Okay. If you become a victim, every situation is unique. Your safety should always come first. Now, there are two views, all right? One is you should not fight back, okay? Especially with property crimes. Give up the property without objection to reduce your risk or injury, okay? So do not fight back. If it's a dangerous situation, give them what they need. Call the police. Give the police as many details as possible. Let the property go. If it's something like credit cards or something like that, cancel the credit card. Okay, there, that's more important than risking your life to protect the property. Okay. The other view says you should resist the assailant. Criminals don't want an audience. Okay, by and large, criminals don't want an audience. All right, so use self-defense techniques to protect yourself, but know your limitations. If the assailant has a weapon, assume it will be used. Scream, blow a whistle, make noise. Okay, because again, chances are they don't want an audience. If you cannot run, sit down so you will not get knocked down. Okay? And call the police as soon as you can. The longer you wait, it is likely the criminal will get away. Right? It's also possible that evidence could be destroyed. Okay, like fingerprints or something like that. Blood samples. All right, call the police as soon as possible. Get them there. Okay. So these are the two approaches. One approach says don't fight back. Okay. The other says do, but you got to know your limitations. All right. And self defense, we're not talking you have to take a class in self defense. You can, but there, even in school trainings, when they talk about active shooters and stuff like that, there are ways that you can use things around you to fight back. Your keys, for example. Okay. If you use your keys, you can poke them in somebody's eye. All right. We've been told if somebody comes in the classroom that's threatening my students or threatening myself, right? Use a book, okay? Hit them with a book, all right? Um, when we talk about self-defense, we're talking about fighting back, using what you can, but know your limitations, okay? Know your limitations. Another controversial, besides, should you fight back or not? Another controversial topic kind of deals with what if you aren't the victim itself, like you witness a crime, what are your obligations to help a victim? Do you have obligations to help a victim? Until recently, the answer was no. Okay, you had no obligation. In fact, there's a very, very famous court case out of New York. A woman was stabbed to death. Okay, it was on a hot night. Her neighbors had their windows. It was an apartment complex. Her neighbors had their windows open, and they heard her screaming. They heard her screaming for help. They heard the assault take place, and then they heard her die. She basically, I think, choked on her own blood and stuff like that. They heard the death sounds, okay, and nobody came to help her. And at the time, because it was in the 50s or 60s, I think, when that case happened, at the time, there was no law that said anybody did have to help her. Okay. And after that, people began to say, is this really what we want to happen? All right. And in some cases, people said, I don't want to help, besides the fact that they could put themselves in danger. I don't want to help because if I try to help out and something happens, then her family might sue me. Okay. Well, there are things called Good Samaritan laws. All right. Most states have Good Samaritan laws that relieve bystanders, I should say, from most civil liability when you help people in danger. Okay. Does not require people to help, but if you do help and something still happens to the victim, you cannot be held responsible for that. Okay. It removes civil liability if you help out somebody. Several new laws, again, in response to that one case I was talking about a second ago, several new laws do require witnesses to offer whatever help they can reasonably provide without endangering themselves. So, a lot of times, what that means is call the police. All right. That was the problem with the young lady in New York, is nobody even called the police. Okay. So at the very least, that's what you should do. If you don't want to get involved and you don't want to physically, you don't want to endanger yourself, okay, you don't want to get involved physically and stuff like that, you need to at least call the police, okay, and get them involved. So until recently, there's been no obligation for you to help come to the aid of a victim. But again, we've seen an evolution. You don't want to hear somebody get stabbed to death and then hear them die. You need to call the police, okay? And if you feel comfortable intervening, know that there are things like Good Samaritan laws, okay, and other laws that are going to protect you if you're trying to help somebody out, okay? Now, briefly, that's it for victims. Okay. Like I said, we are going to get into more specific details. We're going to talk more about this evolution of trying to protect victims as we move throughout the rest of the semester.